Hey, it's Mike here, and today the BBC says vegans are stupid. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but in this article they say, could a vegan diet affect intelligence? Opening it up with how a vegan diet is low in, or in some cases entirely devoid of, several important brain nutrients. And they ask, could these shortcomings be affecting vegans' abilities to think, which, honestly, maybe it's because it's British, but that does not sound like good grammar to me. Now, I hear vegans get called a lot of things. Annoying, self-righteous, but not often do I hear them get called unintelligent, although now I definitely sound self-righteous. So let's unpack this article's claims against vegan brains, and make no mistake, this is a bit of a vegan hit piece. 100% of the claims are negative against a vegan diet. In addition to that, a lot of the claims are using some very biased research. They're getting a lot of facts wrong in this article, and the author seems to ignore the up-to-date research on blood levels of vegans of these nutrients that she says are concerning, which backfires in a couple cases, and she also just doesn't mention anything positive, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, mention some of the nutritional ways that a vegan diet may be supporting intelligence, as well as preserving brain function, and in the interest of everyone's brains functioning, let's actually go and get started. All right, here's the article by science writer Zaria Goravet, I believe, and it was released, yes, over a week ago, which, as usual, is about 5 internet years. Gotta love my timing, but you guys requested it a lot, so I'm doing it. And we'll get to the gritty nutrient by nutrient claims, but first, like any good middle school paper, she starts off with Gandhi. I'm kidding, it's fine to mention Gandhi in any context, but she says that as a teenager who was raised vegetarian in India, Gandhi decided to eat meat at one point. This anecdote is really right up there with Hitler was vegan in the sense that it's sort of appealing to some vague association of a plant-based diet with a historical figure that has no bearing on modern dietary choices. But zooming out, it appears that Gandhi didn't even try meat here because of health reasons. He was just searching for the perfect diet, whatever that meant for him. In other words, he was basically the vegetable police of 1890. Anyway, so I'm not putting too much stock in the intro and the addition that the Adventist vegetarians, which includes a reasonable portion of vegans, is arguably the longest living population on Earth. I think we can just move on from there, but I want to add an anecdote of my own while we're anecdoting it up, and that is, in terms of smart vegans, 2-time world memory champion Jonas von Essen is a vegan. He won those championships as a vegan, and just as an example of what he can do, he has the Swedish record for reciting 13,000 digits of pi. How could the inert block of tofu that is a vegan brain even support such feats? I don't know. Anyway, she continues to frame this issue by, throwing the idea that meat made us human out there, and I have a video completely dedicated to this, but while I don't deny that meat played a role in growing the human brain, I think it is massively exaggerated. Just from a logical perspective, if meat was the magic brain-building food, perhaps the apex predators like lions would be the smartest of all of us, but they are not. While people, including her, like to focus on the fat in our brain, which is a lot easier to acquire over a lifetime, it's really the glucose and energy demand of our brain that is most important. And guess what is made up of glucose? Starch, and that is a unique food that humans gained access to, which gave them the advantage required to become more intelligent than any other animal by at least our anthropocentric standards. And I want to move on because I don't think appealing to nature here is that valuable for the overall conversation, but this did get me going researching brains on the internet, and I stumbled upon what I consider to be the most important fact of 2020 I've learned so far, and that is that the bony-eared assfish has the smallest brain-to-body ratio of any living vertebrate. After a quick review of how veganism is on the rise, not controversial of a topic, she then seems to spotlight a bunch of troll title headlines saying, quote, "Recent concern about the nutritional gaps in plant-based diets has led to a number of alarming headlines, including a warning that they can stunt brain development and cause irreversible damage to a person's nervous system." And one of those headlines is covering Emma Derbyshire, who I have a whole video on, and she, of course, says that vegan diets are lacking in choline based off choline supplement industry funded studies, and she herself had a recent study that was not just funded by the choline supplement industry, but also the egg industry and the meat advisory panel, all of which she unethically hid in her BMJ article until several revisions later. The other link is to a Daily Mail article, and we know their quality of reporting, so no Pulitzer Prize there. But for just a bit more substance, the main expert they are quoting there is a woman who is probably best known for saying that breast isn't best, and yes, it turns out that she was funded by the infant formula companies. Not sure what she has against vegan diets, but not a great source of information. The BBC article then continues by saying, there's a German nutrition organization that says that vegan diets aren't suitable for all stages of life. completely ignoring everywhere in the article, does not mention it, that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the largest group of nutrition professionals in the world, says that a adequately planned vegan diet is suitable for all stages of life, and that is echoed by nutrition organizations all over the world. But she said it was backed by this 2018 review, so it must be legit. Well, that review is so radical, it says that not even vegetarian diets in general are suitable for all stages of life. She then later quotes that review's author, this Nathan guy, as an expert who says that going on a vegan diet is really experimenting on yourself or your child. But thankfully, she later corrected the article, which originally said he was a biologist at Oxford, but he's actually just studying philosophy of biology at Oxford. So he's definitely not a child nutrition expert or anything like that. And speaking of philosophy, his anti-veg stance seems to fit into his greater philosophy, which includes climate denialism, making very worrisome claims about racial intelligence and vehemently defending a racist academic who was removed from their position. There's one idea in his review that it's a bit of a tangent to intelligence, but I wanted to address it anyway because I probably won't otherwise, and that is that the vegetarian nutrient intake is so much worse that vegetarian women will actually give birth to less males because they require higher levels of certain nutrients, pointing to one very tiny study for an observational study that just looked at 300 vegetarian women showing a lower male birth rate. But guess what? India, one of the largest countries in the world with one of the highest vegetarian populations in the world, their ratio of males to females is actually higher than the US or other higher meat, higher animal European countries, pretty much all of them. India actually has about 17 million more males than females, and apparently they're all on TikTok. Why am I spending so much time on this Nathan guy? Well, looking at his review, there are some striking similarities between it and the BBC article at hand here, including the reference to this obscure Kenyan study here. She says this study is sort of the best study we have showing that vegan children would probably have lower intelligence, and it essentially supplemented Kenyan children with either meat or milk or oil for energy. There's definitely a lot wrong with her claims around the study, like for example how the oil group, which is just added calories, did better in certain areas. And yes, on one of the tests the meat group did score higher, but equally, in the opposite direction, the milk group did worse than the control group, which completely undermines her notion that there are these animal-specific nutrients, such as B12, other animal compounds, and animal fats that would make kids smarter. And they also didn't add other foods as supplements. Perhaps some nutrient-dense plant foods could have scored higher than anything else. We don't know. It's also worth mentioning that giving a set of children a food that is culturally a highly valued status symbol could have psychological effects that could lead to higher scores. You may be familiar with the famous experiments where telling students that blue eyes were superior resulted in lower test scores for brown-eyed children. And when we're talking about intelligence, one thing that people don't talk about as much is emotional intelligence, even though I think it's very important for human interaction and solving the problems of humanity in general, and one of the hallmarks of that is empathy, and it appears that vegans could have a higher level of empathy from this study that did MRI scans of vegans, vegetarians, and people who eat meat. Well, it appears that the vegans and vegetarians were more empathetic in terms of their brain responses to animal footage, etc., and in some cases the vegans appeared to be the most empathetic. Not a surprise. Now for the actual nutrients she claims could be holding those vegan brains back. Quote, "In fact, there are several important brain nutrients that simply do not exist in plants or fungi. Creatine, carnosine, taurine, omega-3, heme iron, and vitamins B12 and D3 generally only occur in foods derived from animal products, though they can be synthesized in the lab or extracted from non-animal sources." This is highly misleading because, well, you're not going to get your creatine, carnosine, or taurine from plants. We make our own. They are not considered essential nutrients by any credible body. She spends a lot of time talking about creatine. I should probably do a whole video on it, but she hammers out some sort of associations with intelligence and benefits of creatine, but even she doesn't seem that compelled. Quote, "The brain largely makes its own supply, so it's not clear if vegans actually need any extra. Instead of being a major source, the creatine in our diets might only be used by the brain in extreme conditions. In fact, there are studies showing ever so slightly higher brain levels of creatine in vegetarians versus people who eat meat, and no, there aren't really any vegetarian sources of creatine that are meaningful. So they're basically in the same boat as vegans." And to quote Vegan Health on this, to credit them, quote, "A 2017 study from Brazil examined the effect of creatine supplementation on brain creatine. It included 13 vegetarians and vegans, compared them to meat eaters, their brain and muscle levels of creatine were not different, and brain levels didn't change in anyone after supplementation. So well, yeah, creatine might have some athletic benefits for everybody. It's not a very compelling case that vegans are at a disadvantage here. Anyway, moving on to omegas. She actually had a correction on omega-3s. Quote, an earlier version of this article stated omega-3 generally only occurs in animal products. This article has been corrected to make clear that there are 3 types of omega-3 fatty acids and that one of these, ALA, can be found in plants. Yes, those shorter chain plant-based ALAs are converted into the longer chain ones like DHA in our body, and if you are concerned about this, you can get it from algae. And people don't seem to care when DHA is added to cow's milk, but the moment vegans take it, they freak out. Next, you mentioned heme iron, and heme iron is one of the reasons that the WHO deemed red meat and processed meat carcinogens. And in terms of levels from this Swiss study, vegans did not have lower levels of iron in their blood. So later in the article, when she says that low iron is associated with lower IQ, well, that's, I guess, an equal problem for both diet groups. As for B12, she makes a lot of associative claims and cites a study from the UK that a bunch of vegans had B12 deficiencies, but the reality is that data is from the 90s, and 3 out of 3 of the most recent studies looking at vegan blood levels showed no difference at all. They were not worse off. So her negative claims here are out of date, and I really wouldn't be surprised with the emphasis on vegan B12 if vegan B12 levels end up averaging higher than people who eat meat. Just a thought. And finally, I'm so happy to say that this next statement also needs to be corrected. She says that, to paraphrase, B12 is only found in animal products like eggs and meat. Wrong. Duckweed has bioavailable forms of B12, and it is an aquatic plant, so that's invalid. Please add a correction. As for vitamin D, just to nutshell it, she appeals to the same 90s data. But back to this German study which showed those good B12 results, vegans were higher than vegetarians in vitamin D. They weren't statistically significantly different from meat eaters, but worth mentioning. And the food landscape has changed. No one gets mad when vitamin D is added to cow's milk, but it's been added to plant milk, which is a huge part of people's diet nowadays. I don't really think this is going to sway anyone. Next, there's vitamin B6, and this is where things really start to backfire. I've never seen anybody attack a vegan diet for vitamin B6. Well, looking back to that same Swiss study, it appears that the vegans actually had higher blood levels of vitamin B6 than the meat eaters. So, in other words, could BBC News be affecting your intelligence? I'm just kidding. Moving on, there's also one that she doesn't mention, probably conveniently, and that is folate. To that same study, vegans have 4 times lower folic acid deficiency rates than the meat eaters. And this is really important because folic acid deficiency is the most common contributor to the most common birth defects that we have, which include being born without a brain or major brain issues. So that's a pretty big one right there. Now I want to flip the script and mention a major reason for why non-vegan diets could be damaging for brains, and that is that higher animal fat diets can clog arteries and do damage to your brain essentially by starving it of nutrients. Kind of gross image alert. Here are the arteries of somebody with Alzheimer's, and here are normal brain arteries. Clearly they're kind of gunked up. And from this study, the highest saturated fat intake group had 220% the risk of getting Alzheimer's. And from this study, high LDL or bad cholesterol is linked to early onset Alzheimer's. And for those that don't know, vegans have super low, the lowest levels of LDL or bad cholesterol of any of these diet groups, so they win there. And another point is a lot of these brain degeneration diseases are highly affected by inflammation and oxidative stress, and oxidative stress is buffered by antioxidants. Plants on average have 64 times higher antioxidants. Vegans eat more plants. Clearly, vegans have an advantage in this area. People put on a vegan diet have about 30% lowering of inflammation markers, which is going to help prevent these degenerative diseases. In the interest of time, I just want to cover one more nutrient of concern for her, and that is choline. Her claims here, I think, are ridiculous, some of which are even factually incorrect. The most dramatic claim here, that high maternal intake of choline gave their children a lasting cognitive edge, was actually citing this study, which was funded not just by the egg industry, but also the beef industry. Good stuff. As we know from the dietary guidelines hearings recently, these industries are manufacturing a reason to try and force people to keep eating these products, and the main one they're putting out there is choline.
The best dietary sources of choline are animal source foods like eggs and meat.
But that study here has some major problems as well. First of all, she was dishonest firstly because apparently lasting cognitive edge is just newborn reaction times up until around a year old. And it was just a few milliseconds in about 20 children. and the study even admitted to a long list of limitations. The only edge here is the ethical cliff that all of these researchers have jumped off in order to keep working for these industries. Now for mistake number, I've lost count. Under this soy image, the subscript says that soy contains no choline. That is another factual error. It contains a reasonable amount of choline, and it's also worth mentioning that high choline intake can increase TMAO, which has been implicated in heart disease. So not something you want to have a ton of anyway. Now at this point I have to ask, why did this woman write this? She doesn't appear to have some overt industry funding or any major motivations against vegans. In fact, she just recently wrote a quite pro-vegan article, which honestly kind of seems like a rewrite of that Guardian article on why people hate vegans. That point aside, it's kind of confusing. So my guess is she's actually formulating articles for the BBC that she believes will get the most clicks, whether they are anti or pro-vegan. She saw that all of these troll, completely anti-vegan ones got a ton of clicks and shares. Also, that Guardian one was massively more shared than the average one. So, why not sort of follow those formulas? Regardless of her motivations, she made this completely one-sided attack article on vegan intelligence, but it clearly fell short. It had very outdated numbers in terms of vegan blood levels on nutrients. In certain cases, just not looking at the blood levels and being completely wrong about them, like B6 being higher in vegans. You also can't make the case for B12 anymore. She didn't mention folate, which is a pretty key nutrient here, and the other ones just weren't very compelling concerns in terms of vegans. In addition, vegans don't consume super large levels of saturated fat, which clog arteries and contribute to brain degeneration. In conclusion, this article has lowered my intelligence. No, I'm just joking, but I do not believe that this article is valid, and I do think the author should consider that maybe after the 5th correction, she should just take it down, or if not, then feel free to email me or something and let me know why it's still so great. And final point, I haven't mentioned my ebook in so long that a lot of you guys don't even know that I have a whole food vegan cookbook. It's got a bunch of delicious recipes. It's oil-free, a bunch of unprocessed, yummy stuff. So link down below as it is in every video. And thank you for supporting me. And thanks for watching. Feel free to let me know down below what you thought about this BBC article. Kind of fun stuff, right? Fun stuff. Okay, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.